Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to be talking about class synergies, what some really OP party compositions could look like. And this video is for people who are maybe coming back to the game, maybe they're looking for a new main, or maybe you're watching this and you want to convince your friend group to get into the game and you want to party prog together and you want to pick a really strong party that you can play together and just run through bosses with, and you know that this party composition will be super strong. So that's what this video is for, and we're gonna talk all about it. We're gonna talk about why these party comps are really strong, what makes them so OP, what synergizes with what, and what are some of the recent changes that allowed for these things to happen. So if this type of video is interesting to you or you get some sort of value from it, definitely subscribe because it lets me know that you like these types of videos and it really supports me a lot. Also, pull up to the live stream where you can watch me and my party do a bunch of bosses and have a really good time. There's also the Discord linked below where you could join the community, have a good time. With that all being said though, let's talk about it. So first of all, there are many different classes on this game. So it could be hard trying to figure out a party that is really strong together. And to talk about what's really strong, we have to look at the history and the changes that have been recently made that make these classes work together very well. So recently in the Korean version of the game, they just announced that they are changing the cooldowns of big bursts from 3-minute down to 2-minute or even 1 minute. So what that means is every single class in the whole game is going to be synergized together very well, and nobody's going to have to wait on cooldowns for each other, and everything's just going to be very nice and lined up. So that change allows for so many more parties to work better together than ever before. If you want to know more about what these changes were, I'll leave a link below to my video that I covered in regards to all of these changes. But long story short, because everything is 2-minute or on a 1-minute timer, the classes synergize way better now, which is amazing for everybody, amazing for people who want to party progress and people who want to play together and not have to suffer waiting for each other's cooldowns. For example, as of recording this video before that update comes out, Kali, which is the class star we're looking at right now, she has a big 3-minute burst cooldown. But if she wanted to party with, for example, Angelic Buster, who has a 2-minute burst cooldown, if they wanted to use all of their buffs together and benefit from everything at the same time, the Angelic Buster would have to wait a whole extra minute before she could use her burst, which is obviously inefficient and not ideal. So therefore, you wouldn't really typically see an Angelic Buster and a Kali party together because the party buffs only last for so long and one person would have to sacrifice for the other person to get stronger. But like I mentioned, all the classes are going to be on the same timer now, so therefore they could synergize a lot better together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some characters that have some very strong party buffs and tell you why they're really good and who they would synergize very well with. So let's talk about one of the best classes to have in a party, period. Shade. So this character is a Shade, and the reason why Shade is so strong to be in a party with is because it offers 2 buffs that are very powerful together. So the first one is this skill here called Soul Splitter. So long story short, what Soul Splitter does is it gives your entire party 15% final damage. So what that means is everyone in your party will be doing times 1.15 damage while you use this buff on a monster. So for example, if I was a Shade player and I wanted to buff up my party, I would go into the boss and use the Soul Splitter ability right before everybody's about to burst, and you would see this like a green ghost version of the boss appear, and during this window the boss is soul split, so you have like a 10-second window to do your big burst and do a lot more damage. So classes that have a very fast burst can benefit a lot from having a Shade in the party. So something like a Night Lord or a Mercedes, a Hayato, Angelic Buster, any of the classes that have a very fat burst that is very short and condensed would benefit a lot from having a Shade split. Now, to be honest, most classes are like that. So putting Shade in the party for any class would honestly be really good. And not only that, Shade itself does do good damage too. So it's not just like a support that does 0 damage. Now, the next buff that we got to talk about that makes Shade even more OP is this buff called Spirit Gate, which is one of Shade's sort of burst skills, but also gives you a really big buff for everyone in the party. So Spirit Gate, it says at the bottom here, it says, attacking an enemy afflicted with the debuff increases critical rate by 80% and critical damage by 10%. So you might read this and think like, okay, I'm only really getting 10 critical damage because I'm already at 100% crit rate. Why do I need the additional 80% crit rate? Now, what's really good about Spirit Gate is it synergizes with all archer classes extremely well, and is something that is honestly very, very broken. So to understand why Spirit Gate is so strong, we have to go on an archer. Now, every single archer in the game has this skill called Vicious Shot. You get this from your 5th job. Every single archer in the whole game has access to this skill. Now, what makes Shade so good and what makes these 3-minute to 2-minute cooldown burst changes so good as well that I mentioned at the start of the video is a lot of the archers that are really strong, like Mercedes and Kane, for example, have always been on a 3-minute timer. But now that it's on a 2-minute timer, just like Shade can synergize with Mercedes and Kane very, very well. So what Vicious Shot does is it allows your crit rate to go above 100% and your critical damage increases by half the amount of crit rate you have. So for example, because I have 124% crit rate, if I were to use my Vicious Shot, my crit rate becomes uncapped and I could go as high as I want, and then half of that amount gets converted to crit damage. So if you combine that with Shade Spirit Gate, that gives you 80% crit rate, and I uncap myself and then half of that becomes crit damage, then you get a massive, enormous buff. And what's even better on top of that is classes like Mercedes and Kane have a very fast burst. So not only does it fit within the window of the Shade split, it also fits within the window of the Spirit Gate buff that Shade gives, and fits in the 30-second window that Vicious Shot has. So you can play Mercedes, Kane, and Shade, have them all in a party, and it would be a super juiced fat party. And that's honestly for every single archer too. So Bowmaster, Marksman, Pathfinder, all of them would be super OP with Shade because of the way that Vicious Shot works, along with the crit rate buff that Shade gives. So you can make what's called like an archer comp, where you have a Shade and a bunch of archers that benefit from the Spirit Gate, and you would all be super juiced together. The next thing that we got to talk about is how final damage works on this game, and it's very, very important. So final damage, long story short, is a stat in this game that gives you multiplicative increase in damage, right? So because I have 147.22%, that means I'm doing that much more damage in total, right? But if I were to hit some mobs, you'll see that my combo orb count increases, which also increases my final damage, right? So therefore I'm getting stronger and stronger. This is just how hero works, right? So the reason why final damage is so good is because if you are getting final damage buffs from different sources, those buffs multiply together. So for example, my combo orb, this is giving me final damage, but it's only from this source. I'm not getting any other final damage from any other source. So because I'm only getting combo orb final damage right now, when I increase my final damage from combo orb, it goes up additively. So it gets a simple addition increase because it's all from the same source, right? So now I'm at the maximum amount and it's at 338, which is a lot, but it would be a lot more if each individual stack was multiplicatively increased, which sounds a little complicated, but the gist of it is you want to try and find as many different sources of final damage because those would multiply. So for example, this skill over here, Sword Illusion, if I were to use this skill, it gives me the same amount of final damage increase as if I was getting 6 additional orbs on top of this, but it wouldn't be the same as going from 10 orbs to 16 orbs. Since this is a different source of final damage, then the final damage increase is multiplicative. So each combo gives me like 10% final damage, right? So you would think that I would only gain 60% final damage when I use Sword Illusion. So I would be around 398, right? But if I were to use Sword Illusion, it actually puts me at 482, which is way more. I gained like 100 final damage from this skill, even though you would typically think that it would just add on top of what my current final damage is. But since it's from a different source of final damage, it's a multiplicative increase, so it's even higher. Now, the reason why I'm explaining all of this to you is you want to find, when you're creating a bunch of parties, what are the different sources of final damage I could include in my party, because then I would get as strong as possible. So we talked about Shade Split earlier, how it gives 10 or 15% final damage. I already forgot. But the point is that Shade Split final damage is not just a simple times 1.15 increase to your party. It's 15% final damage that's multiplicatively scaled with how much final damage you have at the moment. Another example is Weapon Aura, right? Weapon Aura, it says final damage plus 6%. So if I were to use it, you would think that I would go up 6%. But actually, I go up way more than that because it's a multiplicative increase since it's coming from a different source that's giving me final damage. So you want to try and find as many final damage sources as you can in the party, and that's what's called final damage stacking, where you can get super strong if you get a bunch of different sources of final damage in your party. So a class in this game that has very OP synergy with other classes is Lyn. The reason why Lyn has very crazy synergy is because of this skill here called Awaken. Now Awaken gives one person in your party a tremendous amount of final damage. You can see here at the bottom it says up to 110% final damage. So depending on how strong your Lyn is, if you have one that's very strong, then you can give your party member 110% final damage. Now if you remember what we just said about final damage sources being multiplicative, that's 110% that is multiplied with all of the other final damage sources that are going on at the same time. So what Lyn does is it over doubles your damage if you have one in your party. That's how powerful Lyn is. Lyn herself also does good damage too, so it's not, again, just a useless support that does no damage and only buffs. So far we have Shade and Archers. We understand how that works. We understand how final damage stacking works. So having a Lyn in your party can super buff someone to like a unimaginably strong point, and you would use that to get your strongest person even stronger in the party. Now the thing with Lyn is it only buffs one person. Now buffing one person that much is still super OP and honestly is insane, but let's talk about more broad buffs that increase your entire party's damage, because Lyn is even more OP in smaller parties. Like if you're duoing with a Lyn or you're in a trio party, Lyn is even stronger. Of course, we have to talk about Bishop. So Bishop can buff up the entire party, and Bishop herself does a lot of damage. It's not a weak class at all. So not only would you be doing like a tremendous amount of damage yourself, you also buff the entire party. So Bishop's Benediction is the skill that creates a zone around you that buffs up everyone in your whole party. Now this buff, similar to the Lyn buff, is dependent on how much int you have. So the stronger the Bishop, the stronger this buff is. But this buff also gets kind of weaker depending on how many people are in a party. So if you're in a full party and you want to buff everyone, you're giving everyone around 6% final damage. But if you're duoing with someone, then the split is much smaller. So therefore, Bishop is still really good because you buff up everybody. Bishop also provides other buffs like damage percent buffs, healing, dispels, damage reduction, extra lives, all these other stuff. So Bishop is like a core super staple in any party because not only do you make everyone stronger, you also increase everyone's survivability by so much. So remember how we talked about Shade and the Archers having really good synergy because of crit rate? There's another class that actually synergizes really well with them through crit rate. Previously, classes like Mercedes and Kane, like I just mentioned, they were on 3-minute burst timers, so they wouldn't work super well with Shade. Obviously, they still would, but it wouldn't be as ideal as them now when they're going to be 2-minute. It's the same with Arc. So Arc actually has a crit rate buff. You can see this skill over here is Scarlet Charged Drive. It gives 20% crit rate to your party. So that's an additional buff that you can have because not everybody always wants to play a class that is just purely like more support oriented, like Lyn and Bishop, for example, even though Lyn and Bishop do a lot of damage, but at the end of the day, they are support classes. So Arc is a very big like damage burst class, right? But it also has some support. And because classes like Mercedes and Kane are going to be on a 2-minute cooldown now, the crit rate buff from Arc has even more value now in a party. Classes that you might not expect have gotten more value have actually gotten more value because of this 3-minute to 2-minute change. Another class that has extremely good synergy with the game is Zero. So the reason why Zero has crazy synergy is it has a special bind that stacks with other binds. So the Zero bind allows you to have insane amounts of DPS uptime. So it's not only just increasing the amount of damage output you can do, you want to also increase the DPS uptime you have. And Zero is one of the very few classes that can keep a boss bound and not move for a very long time. So that increases your DPS uptime and more guarantees your burst to go off flawlessly. And it's actually very OP. So having a Zero in your party is one of the best classes to have in the whole party as well. And of course, it also does a lot of damage. Another class that has really good synergy is Kana. Now, we don't know if Kana is actually going to be turned into a 2-minute burst class in the future. I really hope it does, and Domain goes on a 2-minute cooldown, because if it does, Kana's Domain gives the whole party another 15% final damage, and Kana has a special bind that lasts 15 seconds instead of 10 seconds, which is the longest bind in the whole game. So having a Kana in your party actually increases your damage by so much. It also has boss barriers, healing, and a bunch of other stuff that makes you so much stronger. So having a Kana in your party could be crazy if they change it to have a 2-minute cooldown, just like everybody else. Another class that's very strong and gives really good synergy to the party is Paladin. So Paladin, similarly to Lyn, despite Lyn giving way more final damage, Paladin gives another 15% final damage on top of your chosen partner through Divine Echo. So not only that, Paladin also, because it's going from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, it's going to synergize way better. Class is pretty much indestructible and does a lot of damage too. Now there are some other class synergies that are in the game, but those are really like the big ones that I really wanted to talk about. Now a theoretical super juice party would look like Shade, Lyn, Kana, hopefully if it gets fixed and is on a 2-minute timer, Bishop, Zero, and honestly the 6th slot could just be like a super strong class like Mercedes, for example, that can benefit from the crit rate buffs like Shade. But honestly, you can mix and match a lot of them and still have a super juice party depending on what you want to play. But that's about it for this video. Let me know what types of party comps you think would be super strong, what party buffs are very, very powerful as well. If I miss anything that's like very glaring, definitely comment and let's talk about it. I look forward to what kind of party comps you're in. Tell me what party comps you're currently in as well. And if you watch the entire video, I want you to say the words Phantom, Mercedes, and Evan in that order, so I know you watched the whole thing and that's the password. Anyways, I appreciate you guys for watching. Have a wonderful day and remember to subscribe. Shout out to my members: Blazefire, Shooms, Shagad, Ravi Espa, Koga, Skittles, Dante Victory, CK, Jay, Kyle, Vampiric X, Fresh and Juicy, Assassin, Henzo, Henrique, and Kelvin. I appreciate you guys so much, and thank you everybody who submitted fan art. You can always submit it in the Discord and it'll be put at the end of every video. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day.